welcome to the Middle East Stream. I'm Marwa Osman. Nelson Mandela, South Africa's first black president and an enduring icon of the struggle against racial oppression, passed away last week, leaving the nation without its moral center at a time of growing dissatisfaction with the country's leaders. What makes a great leader, and when exactly does the transformation take place? Tonight we will try to follow the evolution of Nelson Mandela as a jailed dissident in apartheid South Africa and compare it to the greatest present-day apartheid we know, the Zionist apartheid against the Palestinian people. With us tonight to elaborate on this issue is Mr. Bassam Kantar, journalist at Al-Akhbar Lebanese Daily. Welcome with us.
Thank you.
And via Skype, Dr. Maher, Salloum, international political analyst and an ambassador of peace from Florida. Welcome, Dr. Maher, with us tonight. Now let us start by this following report that celebrates the life of a legendary leader.
Nelson Mandela dreamed big, lived big, and has died the same way. This is the crucible of late Nelson Mandela's anti-apartheid struggle, and what better place to commemorate his legacy than here? Tens of thousands of people filled the seats of Soweto Stadium, not to watch a football game, but to give tribute to the man who united South Africa on this green field.
Everybody from all walks of life, they are here to pay that very homage to this very great man. And witnessing that the whole world are coming to honor this very great man.
Here to mourn a legend, to mourn an era that was Nelson Mandela. We are here to pay tribute to Nelson Mandela. We are here to let him go and make sure that he knows that we wanted him to rest in peace.
I woke up here to be in funeral for Mandela, and he's the father of Africa, and we have to be unity in Africa. That is why I'm here today.
I came here early in the morning, about 3 o'clock. I'm here to respect Tata Madiba, to come and enjoy, because today is a celebration and it's a moral service, everything.
Africans who attended the memorial service were present not just to mourn Mandela's death, but to celebrate his life, singing freedom songs and dancing under the rain. God bless Africa, repeated thousands after the choir.
Really, I see a crowd of people here and I say thank you. I feel like I can cry, but I'm celebrating inside my heart.
More than 90 heads of state and leaders from around the world came to pay homage to the prisoner turned president who passed away on Thursday after a long struggle with a lung infection. Mandela's body will be buried in his hometown Kunu, after it lies in state for 3 days in Pretoria, where he was sworn in as president in 1994. His casket will be carried through the streets of Johannesburg in a funeral procession every morning, so that as many people as possible get the chance to bid the father of the Rainbow Nation their final farewell before he is laid to rest on Sunday.
Mr. Kantar, over 90 heads of state have traveled to South Africa to attend a week of events commemorating the life of former South African President Nelson Mandela. Why is it too easy to wrap oneself in the name of Mandela as heads of state and more difficult to take actions that embody his legacy? I mean, if the leaders were true to the audience with their words and those of Mandela also, the world would be a much better place, don't you think?
For sure, but let us also remember that such an icon with a long time of his struggle for his people and for also for the all nations around the world, he was combining a lot of common ground, let's say, for all the delegations and presidents from all around the world. So everyone was coming from a certain point of view and also loving Mandela and supporting Mandela and also paying respect to Mandela from his point of view and defending this point. And this was very clear in the speech of the President of the United States of America, Barack Obama, when he was speaking about democracy. But let us also remember that the same president that was speaking about one of the dean of political prisoners in the world, that he was imprisoned for 27 years, he's still keeping in prison a lot of political prisoners, for example, Jamal Mumia, and more than 65 political prisoners. Some of them are from the native people of the states, and those are also announced in the international reports and the Human Rights Council and Amnesty International. So again, he was paying a tribute for a political prisoner while he is still holding political prisoners in his prisons. This is one of the examples.
Well, let us ask there Dr. Salloum in Florida. Dr. Salloum, until 5 years ago, the U.S. officially considered Mandela as a terrorist, actually. That's 14 years after Mandela had been elected president and 9 years after he had left power. Yet we saw President Barack Obama, as we just heard Mr. Kantar say, that he was hailing the late president, the late African president, and his leadership in the struggle for freedom and human rights. Could you explain to us these contradictory positions?
You know, if we go back to the history of the United States and its foreign policy towards South Africa, back the president since like almost 3 decades ago or 4 decades, they were backing actually the regime of de Klerk and all the presidents before Mandela took office, actually before he was released from prison in 1990. So the American presidents actually, they were blaming the movement, which is the African National Congress inside South Africa, headed by Nelson Mandela and his colleagues, or comrades, let's say. They were blamed that they are communists, and this is not true, according to, American analysts until now. Now, after Clinton came into power, if you remember with me, and your guest for sure, I salute him, my good friend Bassam Kantar, you know that if you remember when Clinton was into power, he tried to a bit develop the foreign policy in a way that they can understand more the human rights aspect in South Africa, actually. So it's different momentum now we're living. Obama, don't forget, is a black president, the first black president ever in the United States. He is addressing mourning a black president, the first black president ever in South Africa. So this is the main question that we need to address, actually, the public today and your guest for sure.
Well, let us come back here to the studios and ask Mr. Kantar this. Mandela had the daunting task to unite groups of people who had been at war with each other for decades. How did he succeed? I mean, how could Mandela overcome decades of hate and decades of distrust between the people?
I said that he's a big icon, he's a big leader, but let us also remember that this is not a movement that was only based on Mandela's efforts or Mandela's personality. This is a liberation movement that started like any other liberation movement around the world. And the main successful point in all this long trip is that Mandela was raising the slogan of the let us all search for a common ground. All the people that they spoke about this unique movement and how much the efforts were done in order to unite people from different backgrounds, different ethnics, different colors. That's something that became later as a model for all the people. This is for sure led for the, let us say, to make this movement more attractive from any other movements. But again, when they were struggling, they were using the same tools and the same ways that all the people under occupation, under aggression, is using, which is the right for people to be liberated, the right for people to live free, the right to meet, the right to express. This is all the rights that all the people around the world were asking for and were struggling for. Why the West, let's say, was more, especially at the last 15 years, speaking about Nelson Mandela and his movement, for sure, we have to go back for some essays that were written early about Mandela, and I'm quoting here a book that's speaking about young Mandela. The book is saying like, For sure, Mandela, during his presidency, was doing business with the West. But if you will ask him, who are your friends, he will speak about Fidel Castro and Chavez and all the Latin American governments that they were in power after revolutions and after taking power after an armed revolution. So speaking about the peaceful Mandela after 27 years of imprisonment, for sure made him the main light that was focusing on his peaceful way of struggling from prison. But before imprisonment, he was struggling like any other people were struggling, and this is something that the West will not speak about now. And if we go back and monitor the last week, a lot of reports in a lot of media outlets in the West and especially in the US, let me use a word that there was a whitewashing for Nelson Mandela. If your guest was speaking about Bill Clinton, and there was lots of reply for his tweet speaking about his friend Madiba, and the people were asking him why, if he was your friend, he was keeping him in your terrorist list during your presidency. There was a lot of lies were wrote and said during the last 2 weeks about Mandela and the real thoughts and emotions with this unique leader.
Maybe we just saw an honest reply there from the Israeli entity. We'll talk about it in the second half when they refused actually to go, but they said it was too costly for them to go. But we will speak about that in the second half. Let me ask you there, Dr. Salloum, do you think the country's history might have been different, South Africa, I mean, if Mandela had avoided prison? I mean, Mr. Bassam, Kantar was saying that before he got into prison, he was working with a group of people as himself to liberate his country. I mean, how did his years behind bars contribute to his ultimate success and the largely peaceful resolution of the apartheid?
I think President Mandela, his character, we need to, dissolute it or, divide it inside. And we're not doctors here, but if we look deep down in his own character, he has been so much patient. Being there, just like my colleague says, at 27 years in imprisonment, it's a very, very long time. And under suppression of the old regime, actually, under the de Klerk presidency, then de Klerk, received the Nobel Prize with President Mandela after he became the president, But the thing that we need to discuss is how much tyranny was there being perpetrated actually by the old regime in South Africa, by the apartheid, by the Praetorians or the leadership back then, and how can we compare it to other regimes in the world? As such, we're going to go discuss this with you, I'm sure, with Israel, for example, according to the Palestinian-Israeli, comparison or the division inside inside the Middle East today. So the whole process is the human rights factor here. We need to dig down deep inside it and analyze why does a guy or a man like Nelson Mandela succeed by becoming the liberator of the blacks inside South Africa after a 27 years, a huge or a long term of imprisonment down there? Is it because of his own character? Is it because of his movement, his colleagues? Because it's a collective, I think, issue, or it's a collective case that everyone did have an effort towards bringing that success and freeing such a nation under siege, actually, or under imprisonment. Nelson Mandela is not the only person who was imprisoned for 27 years. I believe all the black population inside South Africa or major African nations inside Africa today and in the past since 5 decades until now.
Well, Mr. Kantar, Mandela chose a symbol of hate and turned it into a symbol of hope. He insisted on forgiveness as the key to unite his entire country. However, among Afrikaners now, after he passed away, rumors have persisted that after Mandela's death, there will be retaliation against the country's 9% white minority. Now, might that be true? I've read that in several articles today and yesterday as well. Could it be that only Mandela was able to forgive and forget?
We cannot from now give an analysis for such a news. This is something that needs to be based on a concrete reports. But yes, allow me to say that after the famous Durban Review Conference that was organized by the UN in South Africa in 2001, there was a big debate even in the country, like in any other country, in issues related to how the minorities and the elite people, which happened that most of them are the white people, are controlling the economy, and also there are until now a lot of debates and inside the government between tribes themselves, and the way that the new country is raising up and becoming a very developed country. There was also contradictions in the way of living between Johannesburg and all the other areas. This is something that related to their internal debate and internal political system. I don't think that the people will leave a big heritage of forgiveness and a common ground to live together and just pull out any minority from this country. But for sure, discrimination and racism is more now spreaded around the world, just because this system that we are living in is making the people focusing only on the issues related to their right to live and to eat. So this system is making the people more aggressive, actually.
Well, we will continue about the modern age appetite that we live in, but after the break, please stay tuned. We will be right back.
Beyond the lines, beyond the surface, depth, clarity, substance. Beyond the discourse,
beyond politics, beyond the shallowness of everyday politics.
Welcome back to the Middle East stream. We are here with Mr. Bassam, Kantar journalist at Al-Akhbar Lebanese Daily, and Dr. Maher Salloum, international political analyst and ambassador for peace from Florida. Now, similar to the South African appetite, Israel's days of oppression are numbered. Revered by Palestinians, Nelson Mandela once declared, we now know too well that our freedom is incomplete without the freedom of the Palestinians. He even told journalist John Pilger that justice of the Palestinians had become the greatest moral issue of our time. Even former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert once admitted in an interview with Haaretz, and I quote, "If the day comes when the two-state solution collapses and we face a South African-style struggle for equal voting rights, then as soon as that happens, the state of Israel is finished." Let us watch this following report to expose the hypocrisy of Zionism.
More than 5 million Palestinians are denied equal rights by the Zionist regime under a system of apartheid, a deliberate policy of racial or ethnic segregation. Under Israeli military occupation, millions of Palestinians live in conditions which closely resemble the apartheid system that existed in South Africa. No right of free speech, assembly or movement, arrest and imprisonment without charge or trial, torture, house searches without warrant, assassination, extrajudicial murder, no right to vote for the Israeli government. The Israeli regime controls all Palestinian borders, all imports and exports, and all movement between towns and cities. The Gaza Strip, still surrounded, besieged, and controlled by Israel, has been sealed off and effectively turned into the world's largest open-air prison. Israel is the only regime in the world that distinguishes between nationality and citizenship. The Israeli nationality is granted only to those determined to be of the Jewish religion. Only Jews have full rights in the Zionist state, which is defined as a Jewish state under the basic laws that substitute for a written constitution. During much of the Israeli occupation of the West Bank and Gaza, Palestinians lived under Israeli military law and faced military tribunals, having no recourse to a civilian court system. With the passing of Nelson Mandela last week, it is perhaps timely to reflect the South African apartheid analogy with the other epic struggle for justice in Palestine. Both the apartheid systems installed brutal regimes that enforced ethnic-based privilege and cruel racial oppression, and both enjoyed huge support from Western powers and collision with multinational businesses. However, history shows that no state of oppression, no matter how fierce, can last forever. Oppression breeds resistance and its own eventual demise.
Mr. Kantar, the Israeli entity denies that it is based on an apartheid system when clear inequality, deliberate segregation of populations, a prohibition on mixing, and the displacement of non-Jews from lands and resources are what Israeli laws are based upon. How do you compare the South African apartheid to that of the Zionist apartheid?
The new one is more aggressive, is more clear. Usually when you are implementing any apartheid system, part of the decisions will be secret decisions that are implemented undercover. Now we are speaking about more than 16 new laws that was ratified in the Israeli parliament within the last 5 years that will lead to what the Israelis are trying to reach, which they call it the Jewish state. Under this title, a slow but very clear ethnic cleansing is happening inside the occupied Palestine. And also, after Oslo Agreement, it was very clear that the last 10 years of the Palestinian living in the West Bank and in Gaza, the new and unprecedented way of dealing with them in all aspects of life is leading more and more for the very clear way of the apartheid is happening.
Well, Dr. Salloum, if you're there with us, let me ask you, there are two legal systems in place on the West Bank, a civilian one for the Jews and a military one for Palestinians living inside these territories. There are two separate infrastructures as well, including roads, electricity and water. The superior and expanding one is for Jews, obviously, while the inferior and shrinking one is for the Palestinians. Where does the international community stand from all of this?
Well, until now, the international community stays by the United Nations, unfortunately, and this has not been proven successful so far, because the UN has been pressured highly by the Brits, the Britain, the French, and the Americans, actually, wherever we have a point or a certain access to deny Israel its legal rights as an entity of an aggressive movement, actually, by the Jews back in early 1920s, and even at the end of the 19th century until the beginning of the 20th century, until their what's so-called, or the question mark, their independence, which is 1948, according to the Zionist movement, according to Herzl's interest inside Israel today. Now, what we ought to think about, actually, or analyze, is how far Israel, according to the apartheid analogy, is in comparison between the Israeli treatment of Palestinians and in comparison vis-a-vis the South Africans, for example, and their treatments. You know, the South Africans, I meant the blacks, they're being treated by the white supremacists, let's say, back in the de Klerk presidency and before that. Now, if we need to analyze the Israeli policy, some of which have also accused Israel of committing crimes of apartheid, critics of Israeli policies say that a system of a control in the Israeli-occupied West Bank and Gaza Strip actually until now, and including only Jewish, which is Jewish-only settlements. When Bibi Netanyahu says that Palestinians will not have the rights like the Israelis or the Jews inside Israel, this is unequal opportunity for any human being in the world living inside the Israeli state, not only a Palestinian or an Arab that has the right to live inside his own country. I meant Palestine that was annexed in 1948. Now, if we dig deep down to the roots of the problems today, it's because of their inhumane or unhumane acts, actually, like the ID system, separate roads. Palestinians have one, the Israelis have another. The system, the military checking points, the discriminatory marriage laws, the law of return, like you just mentioned a while ago, if not Jewish, through the mother or through the father, you won't have any citizenship, actually, rights and privileges as an Israeli citizen inside Israel today. So, I mean, we need to discuss all these furthermore, because Israel has not shown any submittal to the international community, to the international laws under the United Nations Charter, whether in New York or in Geneva, according to the Geneva Convention. So these are the basic questions or principles that we need to abide by as international community members. Actually, Lebanon is one of them. And Lebanon, for example, my home country, has founded is one of the main founders in the United Nations, as well as other Arab states and major European and Western states in the United Nations today.
Well, let me ask you there, Mr. Kantar, about what Dr. Salloum was saying. The apartheid actually prevails. It is in one territory in which two peoples live. It is ruled by one government, which is elected by one people, but which determines the future and fate of both. I mean, however, Palestinians who are Israeli citizens, I mean, Israeli Arabs there, participate in electing the government as well, unlike what happened in South Africa back then. Why don't they revolt on such a system that is clearly biased if they are actually voting and choosing the system?
Well, it's a very complicated issue. The issue of the Arabs living under the Israeli occupation, under the Israeli direct occupation, are really facing a lot of major deprivation from any right, especially the right, the right to decide their own destiny, and they are always under threat for any ethnic cleansing that's happening. Now the this law that
in the Negev of the Bedouins.
And the people there, they were demonstrating and demanding to cancel this proposal. If we speak about the political system in Israel and the way that they are represented in the parliament, it is very clear that any political group that they are raising and trying to implement their political right to speak about this apartheid and about the Israeli aggression against the Palestinians, there is a proposals to deny them even from unite in a political group. This is something that was documented in the Human Rights Council when the Israelis were reviewing their human rights record. And by the way, let us all remember that Israel was the first state that created a president to withdraw from the Human Rights Council, and they were refusing to discuss their human rights issues under the Universal Periodic Review, which is a new procedure in the UN system, until last month. In this report, it is very clear that the Israeli propaganda on the rights for the minorities, they call them minorities, the Arabs inside Israel, that they have all rights, the right to education, the right to elect, and the right for sure economical and social rights. But the alternative reports of the non-governmental organizations, even some of them faith-based organizations and the Jewish organizations, are saying that there is a lot of discriminations against the Arabs in occupied Palestine. One of the examples of these discriminations is the educational system. For example, it is very clear that the schools in the Jewish areas are more advanced, more secure than any other schools in the Arab communities. Some of the way that the Israelis are trying to isolate even minorities from each other, they created an educational system specially directed to the Bedouins or to the Druze, for example. And this educational system is something different from any other educational system, just to discriminate between the minorities there. If you also speak about the local municipalities, their budget is very low. The way that they are stealing the lands, not allowing them even to collect their own resources from the forests that are around the Arab villages, just under the accusing that this is something that will harm environment. Pipelines and a lot of industrial projects that is splitting the lands is just passing in the lands owned by Arabs. So this is a lot of examples that of how Israel is practicing the apartheid system even inside the state, not only in the what called
I will
state.
ask you further about the internal conflicts inside the state and between the Israeli citizens as well. But I have to ask Dr. Salloum there. We compared to the Palestinians, even the most discriminated against Jews have more rights than the Palestinians living between the sea and the river. For example, the law of return applies to Jews of any origin, but not to Palestinians, even those who themselves or whose parents were born there, but who now live actually in exile. They are not allowed to return. And recently we keep hearing Netanyahu insisting that such a right will never be given back to Palestinians. On what basis then is the Palestinian Authority negotiating with the Israelis?
Then this question needs to be addressed to Hamas leaders and the Palestinian Authority headed by Abu Mazen Abbas or Mahmoud Abbas. But the issue here, why should we trust such an Israeli regime since 1948 until now actually? But lately they have been actually sitting, not Hamas, I meant the authority, the Palestinian Authority. They have been witnessing, they have been submitting themselves, like Saeb Orakat, the major negotiator on behalf of the Palestinian Authority representing the President Abu Mazen. And as such, the Palestinians, they have not created such a scheme or mechanism where they can regain their control or their rights. They are only defending themselves. They are not the aggressors like the Israelis. They are not the powerful movement or the powerful situation on the territories of even Gaza and the West Bank. Unfortunately, now what we ought to do as Arab nations, and this is the major problem that we are having so far, if we compare to the Syrian crisis today, the Arab League is out of question today, has not done its own actions so far, specifically by Saudi Arabians and Qataris and major Gulf countries in the Arab world. What Palestine needs is the immunity by the community of the Arab world. It's not only their own movement as leadership, because they are too weak. After President Arafat, if you remember with me, by the negotiations that he has accomplished with Ehud Barak, back then Prime Minister, under the auspices of Bill Clinton as president in the late 90s, or in the mid-90s actually, when President Clinton was in power, this has not created but failure actually to the Palestinian Authority, even though Abu Ammar or Arafat has gained control of 15%, let's say, or less than that. But that was the ambition by President Clinton, if we all remember, that led to the Monica Lewinsky scandal inside the White House, actually, due to the Clinton pressure on the Israelis themselves that the Palestinians ought to have 15% and not only 8% like the Israelis were accomplishing or trying to submit themselves to the Palestinian Authority and their rights and privileges that they should have. But this cannot be given by Israel. This is only given by a liberation movement like Nelson Mandela, by the forces of the free Palestinians, let's say of Hamas and Islamic Jihad, and all types of resistance on the ground, against the Israeli Zionist regime today.
Well,
so what we ought to, is liberate ourselves and plan a certain strategy where we can accomplish really the new Palestinian state and the only Palestinian state on the grounds of Israel.
Well, we will discuss how the Israeli entity is trying to destruct any future plan for a Palestinian state. But after the break, we have to take our second break for tonight. Please stay tuned. We will be right back.
Time. Variable. Event. The only constant variable in life is change. Broader perspective. Arguments and counter-arguments on our platform.
Global Insights. The Globe on our platform.
We are back at the extreme, underlining the lives of millions of Palestinians who live in conditions which closely resemble the apartheid system that existed in South Africa. Israel's apartheid system also affects Palestinian Arabs, who make up 20% of the population within Israel itself. Apartheid is a central feature of the Zionist state that proclaims it is exclusively for Jews. The following report tells us more.
Israel still denies to date that it is based on an apartheid system very similar and sometimes even hardened than that of South Africa. To eliminate all doubts about it, here are some huge points to be raised that prove the existence of a Zionist apartheid. Unequal funding for Arab education. There are separate and inferior school systems for Arabs inside Israel. In 2001, Human Rights Watch reported that Palestinian Arab children attend schools with larger classes and fewer teachers than do those in the Jewish school system, with some children having to travel long distances to reach the nearest school. The educational system has given a low priority to teacher training for the Arab school system. Arab history. Israel's borders removed from public school textbooks. Teachers are not allowed to teach students in public schools about the Arab history in the region. Israeli textbooks do not show the Green Line or the internationally recognized border between Israel and the occupied territories. They refer to the West Bank as Judea and Samaria. Unequal funding for Arab towns. Arab towns and villages in Israel do not receive the same funding as Jewish towns, even though taxation rates are equal for Arabs and Jews. Right of return for Jews only. Palestinians are denied the right to return to homes and lands that have been taken from them in Israel, while a person with one Jewish grandparent anywhere in the world can settle on land that has been taken from Arabs inside Israel or on Palestinian land in the occupied territories, which is in violation of international law. Plans to Judaize the Arab areas of the Galilee. In September 2001, the Israeli government's Northern District Committee for Planning and Building issued a plan to Judaize the Galilee region, citing the presence of Arabs in the region as a problem. The plan restricts the development of industrial, commercial and development areas in Arab villages and places industrial, commercial and tourism facilities in or near Jewish areas. Discrimination in public places. Arab citizens of Israel are often discriminated against through denial of access to recreation spaces, swimming pools, water parks, and other public places frequented by its Jewish citizens. Government leaders talk openly of expelling Arabs from Israel. Christians and Muslims who have lived in the land that became Israel for 2,000 years and 1,300 years respectively are referred to as demographic threat or the Arab problem. Almost a third of Israel's Jewish citizens favor transferring Arabs out of Israel, and 60% think they should be encouraged to leave.
כדי לרצות לשמור על החיים שלנו ועל השפיות שלנו. אז אני גאה בלהיות גזענית. אני גאה בלהיות גזענית. אם אני גזענית בשביל לשמור על החיים שלי, אז אני גאה.
Well, we just saw they are very proud to be racists. Let me ask you about the separation inside the Zionist state. It is supposedly based on geography, designed to maintain and expand the privileges Jews only enjoy. But Jews too have subdivisions and discrimination according to origin, if they are European Jews versus Arab Jews, and the place of residence, if they are center versus periphery, and if they are veterans versus newcomers to the state of Israel, or based on service in the military. How come the Israeli citizens accept such a degrading treatment?
And let me add to this the new African refugees in occupied Palestine, that they are also treated in a very bad way, in a discrimination and also in a violation for a lot of international agreements. And this is also the new face, not only of the discrimination against the land, the people that they used to own the land, but also for any new citizen or a refugee that is considering that this is the new country that gonna host him in order for an economical reasons. And if we compare, just speaking about Africans in Israel, if we compare the Africans, the Jewish Ethiopian that they were transferred to the new state, and a lot of money was paid for this to be done, with any other African from any near country to Ethiopia, this will give a clear view on the way and the reasons that the Israelis were trying to build their state on which basis. Mm-hmm. It's the basis that it is against any new law, any new convention. It is it's based on faith, and it's also based on the propaganda of the promised land. Mm-hmm. So this is the main point. We have also to remember. We have always to remember that this state is built on discrimination just because it is built on a racist position and a racist opinion. And going back to Mandela, let me mention that the Urban Review Conference in 2001 was a big disaster for Israel, because inside the conference there was a decision that the Zionist system is very similar to the appetite in South Africa, and the people were thousands of people were in streets with the non-governmental organizations. It was a big conference that was that Yasser Arafat, the late Palestinian leader, was there, and Fidel Castro and a lot of other leaders, and the people were chanting local songs about the apartheid system, and they were chanting against Israel. So at that moment, the Israeli ambassador in South Africa considered that this was the worst international event against Israel. But unfortunately, 2 months later, there was the 9/11 attack, and the whole world was debating in another issue.
Way. Well, let me ask Dr. Salloum about your last thought there. Dr. Salloum, is it possible that if John Kerry's peace process between the Israelis and the Palestinian Authority collapses, analogies with apartheid regime in the wake of Mandela's death right now could accelerate efforts to actually evict Israel? Is that possible?
Well, I didn't hear your question. Please, can you repeat your question?
Well, I was saying if Mr. Kerry's peace process that's being going on right now between the Israelis and the Palestinians, if it collapses, can we see analogies of the apartheid regime in the wake of Mr. Mandela's death that could accelerate the efforts to evict the Israelis?
Well, I don't think so, because the Israelis, if you remember with me, just a few days ago, they did not accept to go as officials, presidents like Perez or Bibi Netanyahu or any officials to go to the mourning of Africa today, the leadership. I meant Mandela. Now, can you hear me? I'm sorry. Now, the whole thing, the Israelis right now cannot be, put in a situation where you can pressure them in order to be submissive actually to the Palestinians or the Palestinian rights inside Israel. No, what the Americans need to do is sit down with the Israeli counterparts, which are their allies actually in the Middle East. They're premium allies actually, or top allies. They need to discuss with them how important it is to submit yourself to the human rights issue or to the Commission of Human Rights International that Israel has not submitting so far since its independence or annexation of Palestine in 1948. Israel has not submissive towards any resolution of the United Nations, any national council actually, or Security Council of the United Nations. So America should be pressuring more Israel in order to submit itself towards the international community and be part of such a community in case they wanted to admit or they need to satisfy their own political agenda, whether it's a foreign agenda or locally, in order for them to advance by any bilateral talks or negotiations with the Palestinian counterpart, I meant the authority under Abu Mazen or Mahmoud Abbas, then we analyze saying that Israel has been doing a superb job so far, but this is not the truth, unfortunately, because Israel does not respect all the United Nations resolutions or any national security council members, even at the top level, of the United Nations. Even the Americans themselves. Look at what happened between when the Iranian president talked to the American president. What happened in Israel? What kind of a blame, they actually fired, or they were very aggressive in the need of Israel and the government of Israel against the American administration today under Obama. So you cannot trust an Israeli official or top official under the government such as Bibi Netanyahu that he cannot submit himself to any political, any human rights actually, to any Palestinian on the grounds of Palestine.
Well, let us come back here with our last question for tonight. Unfortunately, I just have a minute and a half left, Mr. Kantar, but I need to ask you, I had a lot more questions to ask, but ending off with our topic, there was this Jewish lady while I was doing my research for this episode, and I read about her. She went to pay her last respect to Mandela today, actually, and she said the following. She said, "As a Jew, I think there is a similarity between the Holocaust and the South African apartheid." And then she continues by saying, "I feel that we, the Jews, could have done more." What more oppression can be done against the Palestinian people by the Jewish states for the Palestinians to actually stand together and fight already for the right to exist and stop people such as this lady of making such propaganda against the Palestinian cause?
Well, this lady allowed me to remember after 8 years of the Durban Review Conference, the United Nations was pushing to do another conference on discrimination and racism in Geneva, and all the Israelis from all around the world, they came there, and unfortunately the Palestinians were absent, and there was a big propaganda inside the UN as if they were replying for the Durban Review Conference, for the Durban Conference in 2001. You can hear the same kind of propaganda and the same way of allowing allowing themselves to describe the Holocaust to the apartheid, which is something true, but also denying any existence of new apartheid system. But if we have something to say, is that we have a big message to Palestinians to unite, because I don't think that Mandela succeeded to unite the South African people without a spirit of unity, of national unity. Without this spirit, also the Palestinians cannot lead to any independent state. For sure, they have a lot of Mandelas. One of them, Marwan Barghouti, one of the Palestinian comrades that he has been held in Israeli prisons for a long, long time. Karim Yunus, the dean of Palestinian detainees, held in Israeli prisons for 31 years. They have a lot of Mandelas, but they need to unite in order to reach their victory.
Hope for that, though, to actually happen in Palestine. I want to thank you very much, Mr. Bassam Kantar, journalist at Al-Akhbar Lebanese Daily, for joining us tonight. And I want to thank you, Dr. Maher Salloum, international political analyst and an ambassador for peace from Florida, for joining us. Also, thank you. That was our show for tonight. Thank you for watching, and tune in next week for more from the Middle East Stream.